Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes of the Illinois Opportunity Project, filling in for the great Dan Proft. Joining me today as a friend of the program, Diana Rickert, Vice President of Communications at the Illinois Policy Institute. Diana, thank you for being on.
I'm so glad to be here with you, Pat.
Yeah, it's great that you're here. It's particularly timely as well because Diana has a monthly column that runs in the Chicago Tribune, and she just had a column that ran this week on a really, really important topic. Diana, why don't you give the folks an indication of sort of what that column was talking about?
I was actually dodging bows and arrows from the unions on my way into the station here today.
You survived. You survived coming in.
I'm here. I'm breathing. This week I wrote about how the Democrats in Illinois, namely Mike Madigan and the government unions, AFSCME, SEIU, Teamsters, are trying to co-opt the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has always been an advocate for the poor, for the vulnerable, for workers, for making sure that people have a just wage and good living conditions. And a few weeks ago, the Archbishop in Chicago, Archbishop Blaise Cupich, gave a speech at a union hall reiterating this Catholic teaching that has basically been around for centuries, that we care about workers. And immediately, Madigan was giving interviews to Chicago media. AFSCME was posting on their Facebook page, on their Twitter. AFL-CIO in Washington, D.C. was posting all of this stuff saying that Cupich is with Madigan, Cupich is with the union, Cupich is against right to work, which actually is not the Catholic Church's position on these issues at all. And nobody called them out on this. Everybody just took that line and ran with it. They believed it, and they thought, all right, there we go. I guess the Catholic Church is going to throw away centuries of teachings and is now aligned with Mike Madigan, who we all know is on his way to being canonized. And somebody had to call them out, so I did in my column this week. And, you know, I'm really happy because there's been a lot of Catholics who've reached out to me and said, thank you. Like, I am a Catholic, and I know what the church teaching is on this, and it's not that everybody should be forced to be in a union. In fact, there is not a single unionized teacher in the Archdiocese of Chicago Catholic school system. So how, terrible and how egregious of Madigan to start to claim that the church is with him.
And of course, the Archbishop didn't take the bait, right? The Archbishop walked back any consideration that he was saying that the church was on the side of public sector unions.
Correct. I did several interviews with the spokesperson for the Archdiocese who was speaking on his behalf because the Archbishop was at the Synod of the Family, and she was extremely clear. Despite what was reported, they are not against right-to-work laws. They did not take a position on whether forced unionization should be the standard in Illinois, and they did not take any position on legislation. But unfortunately, everybody else in the Democrat union media machine declined to report that.
Yeah. Now, what the listeners don't know, Diana, in addition to being friends and colleagues, we also both attended Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is a Jesuit Catholic university. And I remember when I was there and sitting in theology class and philosophy class for all those years, and then my years at Holy Cross High School and everything else that I've learned in the Catholic Church, state employee unions never came up in all of that time. I mean, did you ever hear anything about that during your time in Catholic school?
No, never. And you know what? I come from a household where my dad's in a private union, so I'm not anti-union, but it never came up. Forcing somebody to pay money to a government union never came up in Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, university teachings, or any of the Sundays that I've been at church.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this a little bit later when we have our guest on, but it's a little offensive to me that any political party, whether it's Democrats, whether it's Republicans, any movement like the public sector union movement would try to co-opt a wonderful faith that has done wonderful things for so many people over thousands of years in the Catholic Church. And joining us right now to talk about this very issue is State Representative Peter Breen. Representative Breen represents parts of Glen Ellyn, Lombard, and Wheaton, and he is also a lawyer at the Thomas More Society. Representative Breen, thank you for being on the program.
Hey, good to be with you guys.
So, Representative Breen, I want to ask you, you have a really unique seat in the state legislature, but then also working for the Catholic faith and exercising your faith and through your work as an attorney. Why do you think that Madigan and the government unions wanted to take advantage of the Archbishop here? Why was this moment so important to them?
Well, for many decades, it's been seen that the Democratic Party has a monopoly on Catholics, particularly in Chicago and thereabouts. So when the Archbishop made this speech about the unions and about Catholic teaching on unions, you saw the other side try to amplify certain parts of the speech. And I don't think the Archbishop gave this speech as a political speech. This was not his intent, as I understand it. It got blown out of proportion, and maybe he got caught off guard by not realizing he was walking into a hornet's nest, and to some extent being used by being put up at this time when the state has such grave problems, and we're dealing with these issues of how do we negotiate with unions, particularly on the public sector side.
Yeah, Peter, I mentioned earlier in the program, Diane and I are both Catholics like you, and it's kind of, a little off-putting from either side of the aisle, whether it's the Republican side or the Democrat side, for a party to claim they have a right to religious views. Obviously, the Catholic Church has been around for thousands of years, has done a lot of enormous good for all people of all stripes, all political stripes, all persuasions. And so I'm offended when that happens. As a sort of an office holder, as a politician, how do you view that political angle when they're doing that type of thing?
Well, it's. I mean, certainly, I'm a Catholic Republican, and I think that those two things can be held simultaneously, as I know many people do. And when I see the other side try to say that somehow the Catholic faith requires the adoption of certain left-wing ideologies that the Democratic Party in Illinois has been tranced with, I don't see how that can be done in good faith. And certainly, again, the Archbishop he walked into something. Maybe he didn't quite realize what he was getting into or what the aim of the opponents were here. He probably just wanted to give a speech on unions and the Catholic teaching on it. And really, we've got to remember in the context of unions and parties and things, there's a big difference between public sector unions and private sector unions. There's a big difference between making sure that everyone gets paid fairly and is working in a safe environment, and making sure and then kind of moving for an advantage over kind of the average Joe type level here in Illinois. So and we're seeing that in the debates down in Springfield, where you notice. I mean, folks know that our state workers have got a really good deal right now, and it's probably a deal that we can't afford as a state. And so in the throes of that debate, the other side is going to bring in the Archbishop. They're going to bring in every resource they possibly can, willing or unwilling, to try to make their case.
Now, even from a pure political standpoint, is there any way that anyone can make an argument that the Democratic Party in Illinois has even been looking out for the church in the past few years? Just as a Catholic and as a voter, every time they do something, it seems like they're whacking the church. They're whacking the church on adoption services, foster care, on vouchers, on, religious liberty. Like, when has the Democrat Party even stood up for the church?
It is hypocritical that when they want a political photo, a shot and a quick talk, they'll gladly grab the Archbishop or grab their local priest and, hey, look, we're with the church. And when it comes down to it, you see what happened. And you mentioned the foster care and adoption services case. I was one of the lawyers on that case where we had to sue the state of Illinois because Pat Quinn and Lisa Madigan were going down a road where they refused to contract with Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities invented foster care in this state 90 years ago, and DCFS refused to extend them a contract in order to continue that service. So, I mean, that was the Pat Quinn administration backed up in court by Lisa Madigan and the Attorney General's office. So, I mean, when push comes to shove, they're not with the church. Certainly, and there are plenty of other issues that you can look to, but when it really counts, the other side is not with the church.
Yeah, I mean, we're funding developmental disabilities at a historically low rate across the country. We're not taking care of the people that are most vulnerable. And, the Catholic teaching that I was brought up was to take care of the people who were most vulnerable. And clearly the politicians that are in power in the General Assembly in Springfield, in Chicago, in Cook County and some other places are not adhering to those values. Peter Breen, representative from Glen Ellen and Lombard and Wheaton, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being on Illinois Rising.
Thank you, guys.